Good Saturday, everyone, and welcome into today's daily Bible reading for August the 13th, which happens to be my mom's birthday. My mom's and dad's birthdays are very close to one another, so that always makes it easy to remember one. If I remember my mom's, I know I forgot my dad's, and if I happen to remember my dad's, then I should be remembering my mom's. But happy birthday to them, and I hope everyone is having a great Saturday so far. Of course, our hearts are with Leslie and Billy as they're dealing with Billy's incident this morning where he fell and fractured his hip. Last Jim shared with me, they should be on their way to Park West here soon so they can address that injury and hopefully help to get that stabilized and get Billy probably some much needed comfort for what he's feeling right now at this moment. Our friend has definitely been through a lot in the last year. So let's continue to be praying for them, and anything that I figure out that we can do for them, I'll make sure to pass that along to everyone. But thanks so much for being here today. Let's go ahead and get into our reading, which is a new read in the Old Testament prophets with Habakkuk is on the schedule for today. We'll be reading Habakkuk chapter 1, and then after that, we'll be getting into James chapter 3. Habakkuk 1 for right now, James chapter 3 here in just a moment. Excuse me. Whenever we think about Habakkuk, think about a prophet who was living during the last few decades of the kingdom of Judah, the southern part of the divided kingdom. And as he looks around him, he just sees a whole lot of sin. And Habakkuk is different from other prophets because he doesn't actually address Israel. In fact, what we see here with Habakkuk's writing is more so a conversation, a lament, really, between Habakkuk and God. In first chapter, we're going to see Habakkuk just address the Lord and say, hey, things are terrible here. Do you not see what's going on? The Lord's going to respond, yes, I do see what's going on. And the Babylonians, they're going to come and they're going to take care of this issue. And then Habakkuk's going to come back and say, but hold on a second, they're even worse. They're terrible. So it is just this back and forth between Habakkuk and God. Habakkuk just pouring out his heart to God, the struggle that he's experiencing right now because of the state of his people, and because of in his mind, God just not doing anything about it. You know, how can you be such a good God and yet allow for your people to be so bad? That's the struggle, the internal struggle that is being experienced by Habakkuk during his time as he sees what's going on. And he's just seeking to draw God's attention, at least in his mind, to draw God's attention towards the injustice. Of course, God is well aware of what has taken place, and we're going to see how he acknowledges what's going on and gives Habakkuk a little insight into what he is planning to do with his rebellious people. So let's read together then here in Habakkuk chapter 1, beginning in verse number 1. We read this as being a pronouncement that the prophet Habakkuk saw. Habakkuk's first prayer, beginning in verse number 2. How long, Lord, must I call for help and you not listen, and cry out to you about violence and you do not save? Why do you force me to look at injustice? Why do you tolerate wrongdoing? Oppression and violence are right in front of me. Strife is ongoing and conflict escalates. This is why the law is ineffective and justice never emerges. For the wicked restrict the righteous. Therefore, justice comes out perverted. Now, here's the Lord's response. Look at the nations and observe, be utterly astounded, for I am doing something in your days that you will not believe when you hear about it. Look, I am raising up the Chaldeans, that bitter, impetuous nation that marches across the earth's open spaces to seize territories not its own. They are fierce and terrifying. Their views of justice and sovereignty stem from themselves. Their horses are swifter than leopards and more fierce than wolves of the night. Their horsemen charge ahead. Their horsemen come from distant lands. They fly like eagles, swooping down to devour. All of them coming to do violence. Their faces are set in determination. They gather prisoners like sand. They mock kings and rulers, or they mock kings, and rulers are a joke to them. They laugh at every fortress and build siege ramps to capture it. Then they sweep like the wind and pass through. They are guilty. and their strength is their God. Here is Habakkuk's response to that. Oh, are you not from eternity, Lord my God? My Holy One, you will not die. Lord, you appointed them to execute judgment, my rock. You destined them to punish us. But here's the concern. He acknowledges this is what the Lord said, but here's the rub in Habakkuk's mind. How can God do this? For your eyes are too pure to look on evil, and you cannot tolerate wrongdoing. So why do you tolerate those who are treacherous? Why are you silent while one who is wicked swallows up one who is more righteous than himself? You have made mankind like the fish of the sea, like marine creatures that have no ruler. The Chaldeans pull them up with a hook, catch them in their dragnet, and gather them in their fishing net. This is why they are glad and rejoice. This is why they sacrifice to their dragnet and burn incense to their fishing net. For by these things their portion is rich, and their food is plentiful. Will they therefore empty their nets and continually slaughter nations without mercy? That's Habakkuk chapter 1. Again, Habakkuk sees the sins of the people. He laments and seeks to draw God's attention to that. God says, oh, don't worry, I've taken notice. I'm going to bring a judgment by the hand of the Chaldeans. They're going to be my tool. Habakkuk says, hold on, how could you use them? They're so wicked. They're so bad. Don't you see how bad they are, God? It doesn't make sense that you would use these people to bring judgment. I mean, they're terrible. They treat people like animals. Why would you use them? Now, chapter 2 is going to begin with Habakkuk saying, listen, I'm just going to stand guard here. I will stand my guard post and station myself on the lookout tower. I'm just going to wait and see what God says. And God is going to give his answer in chapter 2 as to how and why he would do such a thing. And he's also going to mention that, listen, it's not like I'm going to use the Chaldeans and the wicked people that they are, and then let them just go and get away scot-free. That's not what's going to happen. So we'll see the Lord address that. Majority of chapter 3, I believe we could probably say, is going to be the majority, the Lord speaking back to Habakkuk. So we'll see that tomorrow in Habakkuk chapter 2. I might have said chapter 3, I meant chapter 2. So we'll look at that tomorrow. But we are going to be in James chapter 3 now. James chapter 3, again, there's not much of a very easily discernible flow to James's writing. It is the New Testament version of the Old Testament Proverbs. In a sense, it is wisdom literature here in the New Testament. Not much by way of structure. So we're just kind of jumping from point to point to point. And at this point within this text, he's going to address the use of the tongue. And that draws us back to James chapter 1. Remember, I said that most of what can be found following James 1 can be traced back to what is found in James chapter 1. So we think about controlling one's tongue, and what that might bring to our minds is what is said in verse 19 of James 1 concerning being quick to listen, slow to speak, slow to anger. It could also be drawn upon being doers of the word, not hearers of the word. Yeah, you might know the right thing to do, but are you doing the right thing with the way that you use your tongue? And especially, without a doubt, verse 26 of chapter 1, if any thinks he is religious without controlling his tongue, his religion is useless and he deceives himself. So let's expound upon that. We have that little, that little nugget of wisdom there in chapter 1 of verse 26 concerning the tongue. But now James is going to unpack that a little bit and add some more layers to what he means whenever he talks about the absolute importance of controlling one's tongue. Let's read that together here in James chapter 3. James chapter 3, verse number 1. Not many of you should become teachers, my brothers, because you know that we will receive a stricter judgment. For we all stumble in many ways. If anyone does not stumble in what he says, he is mature, able also to control the whole body. Now, if we put bits in the mouths of horses so that they obey us, we direct their whole bodies. And consider ships. Though very large and driven by fierce winds, they are guided by a small rudder wherever the will of the pilot directs. So too, though the tongue is a small part of the body, it boasts great things. Consider how a small fire sets ablaze a large forest, and the tongue is a fire. The tongue, a world of unrighteousness, is placed among our members. It stains the whole body, sets the course of life on fire, and is itself set on fire by hell. Every kind of animal, bird, reptile, and fish is tamed and has been tamed by humankind. But no one can tame the tongue. It is a restless evil full of deadly poison. With the tongue we bless our Lord and Father, and with it we curse the people who are made in God's likeness. Blessing and cursing, verse 10, blessing and cursing come out of the same mouth. My brothers and sisters, these things should not be this way. Does a spring pour out sweet and bitter water from the same opening? Can a fig tree produce olives, my brothers and sisters, or a grapevine produce figs? Neither can a saltwater spring yield fresh water. Who among you is wise and understanding? By his good conduct, he should show that his works are done in the gentleness that comes from wisdom. But if you have bitter envy and selfish ambition in your heart, don't boast and deny the truth. Such wisdom does not come from above, but is earthly, unspiritual, demonic. For where there is envy and selfish ambition, there is disorder in every evil practice. But the wisdom from above is first pure, then peace-loving, gentle, compliant, full of mercy and good fruits, unwavering, without pretense. And the fruit of righteousness is sown in peace by those who cultivate peace. James chapter 3. Again, controlling the tongue. If anyone thinks he's religious without controlling his tongue, his religion is useless and he deceives himself. That is James 1, verse 27. And why is it so important to control the tongue? Well, according to James here later on in chapter 3, he says it's important because the tongue, though a small member of the body, boasts great power. And he gives all these comparisons: the bit in the horse's mouth, the rudder controlling the ship, the little spark turning to a massive forest fire. He says, listen, we've been able to tame animals, but man, the tongue is a completely different beast altogether. Why? Because the tongue is really a product of the heart. And that's why he gets into talking about these different types of plants and the freshwater and the spring water, the freshwater and saltwater, It all gets back to what our tongue says, the words we say with our tongues. It's going to be a product of what is within our hearts. If we want to therefore then use our tongues well, then it all gets back to making sure that we're training our hearts well. And that ties in a little bit of what we see here later on about the wisdom and the understanding. All of that is tied back into our hearts as well. If we're training up our hearts, if we're training up our minds to be wise and understanding, guess what? Our tongues will be used well. So for each of us, as a point of consideration for each of us individually, think about how we use our tongues. Do we use our tongues well? Are we using words seasoned with salt, overflowing with graciousness? Are we encouraging others with our tongues? Are we saying the right thing at the right time? Are we using our words well? That's the question we have to ask ourselves. And if we are doing well, then that, I would feel pretty confident saying that is a byproduct of us training our hearts well. But if we might recognize that we haven't been using our words well in whatever way that might be true, then I would suggest to you it's not so much just considering what we say, but it's considering the words the location from which those words proceed, which is our heart, which are our hearts, I should say, I guess. So consider the heart. The heart leads to using our words well. If we're using our words well, it's probably because we have a good heart. If we're not using our words well, it's probably because our heart isn't what it needs to be. If you want to fix the tongue, you must first address the heart. Thanks so much for tuning into this reading. If you have any questions or comments, as always, you're free to leave those in the comment section of Facebook or YouTube. If you need to catch up, you catch up on our website. I do have some updating to do on the website. So I apologize for that, but always the recordings and such are preserved automatically on Facebook and YouTube for you to go back and check those out if you would like. And I'll get to updating the website ASAP. Again, let's be praying for Leslie and Billy as they're going through some struggles today. And I will do my best to keep everyone updated as best I can whenever I gather more information. Again, have a great rest of your Saturday. Looking forward to reading with you again in the morning. 8 o'clock, we'll have our reading from Habakkuk chapter 2 and James chapter 4. Habakkuk 2, James 4.